All right. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm Mark. I'm a software engineer with Typefox. I do a lot of work consulting, so talking about IDEs, DSLs, domain-specific languages, programming languages in general, and so on. But I'm mostly here as a project lead of the Theia project. And so I'll be talking about collaboration, actually. Yeah. Some of you may have seen things already. I've talked about this at the OCX event already, but a lot of you probably didn't attend. So hopefully this is quite new for you. All right. So when talking about collaboration, we first talk about engineering collaboration in particular here. Then we go over the existing tooling that's there in the space. Then specifically, we're going to talk about the requirements that we kind of have in Theia, but also me as a software engineer in Typefox. And then we're going to introduce the Open Collaboration Tools project. So really, why collaborate at all is the question at heart here. And you probably have used some of these tools shown here, like Google Docs, Confluence, Miro, or Figma, or whatever. Essentially, being able to quickly share ideas, being able to quickly iterate on things and collaborate with one another in real time, especially. And in a lot of backgrounds, in a lot of jobs, it's really useful. But you might ask, well, as a programmer, as a software engineer, I don't work with Google Docs, for example. I work with IDEs. And so this might not be fitting, but still, collaboration kind of is still at the heart of software engineering. And I've kind of picked 3 pillars of software engineering collaboration here. The first one being brainstorming, where really we want to throw out new ideas, we want to design a new feature, we want to design maybe a new project on a green field, and we want to see what sticks. We want to try things out, maybe even in code live and see what works, what doesn't, and really brainstorm together. And that's really the main first pillar. Then the second pillar, which is debugging and pair programming, something that's been really bugging me quite a lot, because some of you, I work completely remote, and a lot of people that are working remotely as well might relate to me, because when I'm debugging with someone and someone has an issue and I tell them, well, you have to set the breakpoint in this line specifically, and then hit the next iteration and then jump to the next line and show me this exact variable and so on, it might be quite frustrating. And I've been there, I've been quite frustrated already. And so sitting there in an office environment makes this quite easy, but remotely it's quite difficult, especially if you're only working through screen sharing. And so having tools for that would be great, actually. And something that is also quite dear to my heart, because I'm a teacher at university, is mentoring, actually. And so I've used to work in an office, and the times there that were really invaluable, because I learned so much from the senior engineers there that really helped me get started on my way as a software engineer. And oftentimes I find myself working quite intensely on something, and when someone asks me to quickly come over for a chat, essentially, I try to answer the question as quickly as possible, and don't really take the time to really explain things about the background of something, which I would probably take or do if I was in an office environment and sitting right beside the person that's asking me, actually. And so getting into the thick of it and really mentoring people is also really important when it comes to collaboration and software engineering. And so we want to take a look at tools that already try to kind of solve this, and see what the missing link here is as well, because I'm talking about something new, right? Something is missing here. So let's talk about first the obvious candidate. So a lot of people probably here are working with Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code at least. And so I've probably seen the Visual Studio Live Share extension, which is essentially trying to tackle all of this. So it features obviously sharing your workspace with one another and being able to edit files directly in collaboration in a live environment, being able to see the cursors of one another, being able to share terminals, servers, port forwarding. In an older version, I believe Visual Studio Live Share actually supported audio, so you could actually talk to one another through Visual Studio. I don't think they support that anymore, but it was still a useful feature, I believe, and people asked to bring it back. However, you see it at the small trademark logos there. It's very much locked down to the Visual Studio family of products. And so we can't really use it in Theia, right? We're at the TheiaCon. I want to talk about Theia. So that's kind of not the right fit here. Next up would be some startup approaches. So for example, there's a company called Call Together, which really shines in the support for IDEs, something that I kind of struggle with Microsoft. They actually support the Eclipse IDE, they support VS Code, obviously, and then also all the JetBrains platforms as well. So it's really nice. They actually have I believe, an online environment that I've tried quite some time ago. And if I remember correctly, they were using Eclipse Theia. They might be using something else by now, but back then at least they were using actually Eclipse Theia with their own kind of infrastructure specifically. And then there's also Duckley, which has their own kind of unique selling points. They're doing all the audio and video integration kind of inline into everything. I believe the product is kind of defunct by now. It hadn't received any updates in the last 2 years, I believe, but it's kind of still out there, and I believe you can still use it. And these are kind of the like enterprise solutions that we have. There are also quite a few open source solutions, actually, quite a lot more than I could actually tell about here or present here. So I've actually just picked 2 that I want to really present because they're really good. So for one, we're in the Eclipse space, so it makes sense to talk about the Eclipse Communication Framework, ECF in short. And even though it's an Eclipse project by itself, it's only also for the Eclipse IDE, which is kind of limited. And it's using a very interesting architecture because it's based on, I believe, XMPP, which is like an older communication framework for tools like Jabber and Google Talk, which is also now defunct for the last 2 years. Anyway, cool thing about it is you have kind of like a social media thing where you have contacts and you can share contacts easily, and you can share data across contacts and so on. So it's really useful, and you have this integrated view into Eclipse directly, who all your contacts are, their emails, and what kind of data you can share with them. So it's really cool. And then there's another unique approach, which is EtherSync, actually. They are using this sort of service daemon, actually quite a cool idea, where you have just a single binary that you can kind of hook into any kind of IDE. And then it's just a single small layer of glue code, which needs to connect the service daemon with your IDE in order to provide all the collaboration tools and the collaboration services, and kind of the inner part, the difficult work is actually done in the service daemon, which can be shared across all IDEs. So it's very little work actually getting this to new IDEs. While all the other solutions that we've talked about were kind of always specifically for specific IDEs. However, we do have kind of problems with all of these approaches. But before outlining that, let's talk about the requirements that we have kind of as Typefox. So we're working as a consulting company, and so we have huge business customers that are oftentimes working with Theia-based applications, that are oftentimes working with IDE-like, but not quite IDE products. For example, that are using a web environment, for example, where they embed a Monaco editor, for example, but don't really have full IDE support. They might do this kind of serverless thing where you don't even really have really backend. So a lot of the existing solutions don't really work. And oftentimes, I've talked about, for example, EtherSync with their peer-to-peer approach. Something like this can become very difficult in some environments. And so what our customers especially want is an on-premise solution where they control all the technology and all the whole stack, essentially. And so when it comes to the tooling, I've kind of presented this as a small table. And you can see, for example, that a lot of them don't really support a lot of IDEs. Some of them do, some of them don't. Most of them don't actually are in any way extensible. Something that I actually showed on the last slide is where we want, for example, let's say we have an Eclipse IDE, a Theia IDE product, and we want to have some sort of graphical view on top of either something like a graphical model or maybe a textual model or whatever. And we want to enable collaboration in that custom view. We need to make our protocol that we are basing this on kind of extensible. And unfortunately, there's actually only the Microsoft product that is actually doing that. I couldn't find a way to hook into anything else. Then there's the issue of being on-premise. A lot of them don't actually offer any on-premise support. And then there's obviously licensing issue where, well, we as a company want people to use this, and we want want to be able to use this in customer projects as well. So being able to make this as a free open source project in some way or another using a free open source license would be kind of preferable here. And so we didn't really find anything in this area. Obviously, ECF, for example, with UPL2 fits with the license at least, but everything isn't really supported by any existing tool. And so let me introduce the Open Collaboration Tools project, actually. And as the headline says, it's for all IDEs out in the open. So it's an open source project that aims to really support all IDEs. And now we're here at an Eclipse Foundation project and an event, essentially. And so I can proudly introduce actually the Open Collaboration Tools project as an Eclipse project. Just last month, it's been formally accepted. And it definitely makes sense because we're really doing a lot of IDE work in the Eclipse Foundation. And so having this into the, getting this into the Eclipse Foundation is really a useful thing, especially when it comes to the openness of everything that we want to foster here. Before we go into the tools project itself, actually, let's take a last look at something done by Microsoft. So some of you may have seen this already coming, but this is something that I've noticed in the IDE space in general in the last essentially 10 years, is that IDE protocols or protocols in general in the IDE space have become ubiquitous essentially. And so most of all, foremost is the language server protocol. Some of you may know this, some of you don't. The language server protocol is essentially just a protocol for any IDE to talk with any kind of language service provider. And what I mean with that is, for example, tools like JDT, for example, which are capable of parsing Java code, understanding Java code, and answering kind of requests about that Java code. For example, let's say I want to jump to a definition or I want to get the completion of a specific line of code. All of these informations, all this information can be delivered by some service like JDT, which is written in Java. And so maybe an IDE like VS Code, which is written in JavaScript, wouldn't have kind of the option to hook into them. But what the language server protocol is doing essentially is giving IDEs, or rather language clients, a way to communicate with so-called language servers via this language server protocol in order to get this information across, for example, language or runtime boundaries. And Microsoft introduced this essentially together with VS Code back in 2016, and it really became ubiquitous. So it's now supported in Eclipse via the LSP4E project. It's supported by JetBrains in all, I believe, enterprise versions of their products. And Red Hat recently released a plugin for language server protocol, for language servers in all kinds of JetBrains products. And so that's really became ubiquitous, and now essentially every language offers a language server as well. I don't believe there are like a lot of languages left that don't have one. And in a similar vein, there's now the debug adapter protocol, for example, which kind of attempts to do the same with debuggers for certain runtimes, for example, Java runtimes, or maybe even native systems, which also require specific debug adapters, for example, for the LLVM system, where essentially you have just a slim debug adapter, as the protocol name says, that your IDE can connect with in order to provide all the debugging services. And in a similar manner, there's the build server protocol, which is actually also quite an old project, but I've only recently learned about, which is mostly used in the Java world. And so all of these protocols are kind of everywhere in IDEs. And I've been asking myself, well, why don't we have a protocol for collaboration as well? And that's kind of the thing that we're building here. So the Open Collaboration Tools project itself is really built on the Open Collaboration Protocol, short ICP or OCP, that aims to connect every IDE with every other IDE in a similar manner that already language servers connected every language to any IDE. And so going into this a bit more technically, so this is technically based on a peer-to-peer communication system. Essentially, we want everyone to communicate with one another. We want to be able to exchange workspace information, file information, and maybe something like file updates, for example. Let's say I edit a file. I want to send this kind of as a broadcast. Hey, I've just edited a file. Please apply the update to your file if you have it open. And so you can kind of imagine this as a peer-to-peer remote procedure call system with broadcast as well. And in this case specifically, we want the host of the session of a collaboration room to kind of act as a single source of truth, because they have the workspace after all, so only they can share it. Going into this a bit deeper even, I've talked about this as a peer-to-peer protocol, and I've talked about peer-to-peer being difficult actually. So if you're sitting behind a firewall, behind a VPN, behind a proxy, if you have stuff like that running lying around, it can become really difficult to set up a good, well-running peer-to-peer system. And so what we've instead done is essentially create a pseudo peer-to-peer network via essentially what we call the open collaboration server instance. So this is essentially a message relay that you communicate with yourself that then communicates with everyone else. So you don't even need to have a connection with everyone. You just need a connection with the open collaboration server instance, and everything then is handled by that server instance. So let's say I send a broadcast. I just sent the information. Hey, I want to send a broadcast to everyone. Here's the data to the server. The server takes care of the broadcast itself. That's a really nice thing because we, well, for one, reduce a bit the transmission bandwidth essentially on the client side, and then also have one single point essentially that we can reference for everyone, which can also act as a kind of identity provider solution. So let's say, for example, I want to add Keycloak for this to actually secure my system, essentially, that no one else that isn't supposed to actually is able to enter a room. So you can add any kind of different authentication provider, OAuth or whatever. And obviously, it's supposed to manage creating and joining collaboration sessions as well. So it knows about sessions and is able to join, make users join them. Okay, so that's from the technical side of things. Let's talk about things that already are there. So for one, we obviously already have the collaboration server up and running. It's available on the official project website, and you can also host it yourself. The project is completely open source. And what we also already did is integrations into a few IDEs. So for one, we integrated it into Visual Studio Code. So it's available as a VS Code extension, both on the official Visual Studio Marketplace as well as the OpenVSX Marketplace. So it's not only available for the official Visual Studio Code, but you can also download it, install, and run it on tools like Gitpod, Coda, VS Codium, and any other thing that is really built on the official VS Code source. And then, even though in theory, Theia could make use of that extension as well, we actually built a deeper integration into the Theia framework, which is now available on all Theia-based products. And the idea is behind that we really are able to go deeper than just the surface level VS Code extension API, because we will always be limited by that API. And in Theia, we can essentially take care of everything by ourselves if we want to go that route, essentially. And so, we have this Theia collaboration package. It's available as a Theia extension. It will be included in every monthly release, so you won't ever deal with kind of outdated extension in that regard. It also runs in every environment, which is actually really cool because it's also running in the work in progress browser only mode. So you don't even need a backend in order to join a collaboration session, for example. It still makes sense to have a backend to create a session because it's still in the workspace and so on, and maybe somewhere we can run a terminal and whatever. But joining one doesn't even require a backend, so you can really set this up very easily. And then in the spirit of Theia, this is very much freely extensible. So you can really hook into the services that are exposed by the package, and which then exposes the protocol to really hook into it to create your own collaboration experience, so to speak, add new views to the existing protocol, or rather add new messages to the protocol to support your custom views and so on. So that's really at the heart of this. And we mainly built this for Theia, but we also saw the potential for other IDEs, which is why the protocol itself really is completely IDE agnostic. And then obviously we have something more planned. So right now I mentioned we only support VS Code and Theia. Next up, which is already in the works, is support for the Monaco editor. So I've talked about integrating Monaco editors in web applications, for example. This is supposed to enable collaboration in all kinds of web applications that don't require full IDE. And then also I've talked about like service daemons previously. We are building something similar, which is called the Open Collaboration Service Process, which we can run side by side with any non-JavaScript based IDE. So that will be, for example, available as a JetBrains plugin and as an Eclipse IDE plugin in the future. We're already looking into that. And then there's an even further out there roadmap. So for one, obviously, that's a service daemon. Then we are looking into more authentication methods. For example, building a generic OpenID Connect provider into the server itself. Then I've talked about a bunch of features like the that should be supported or you might want to support in collaboration, but aren't quite yet. For example, notebooks, sharing all the language services. For example, what I mean with that is that I, for example, want to open a file, but I don't have a backend available, right? So I don't get all the language server goodness essentially. And so I maybe want to ask the host actually what they would receive as a language server at this point, and answer that way. And so essentially hook into the host for all the language services. That would be really useful. Then also, of course, terminal sharing, essentially server sharing, so port forwarding, and obviously also shared debugging. And then there's also some technical details, like for example, replacements for VSLS, if anyone's familiar with that, but I won't go into too much detail here. Anyway, we have a bunch of stuff that we are looking into. Stuff that is already supported as well. So obviously normal text-based workspace sharing is already completely supported. Some of you may have likely seen the presentation by Jonas yesterday, the intro presentation about all the new things in Theia. The collaboration support came up there as well. He showed like the workspace feature, sharing feature, the text editing feature, and so on. Unfortunately, there's not much more to show, which is actually why I don't want to show a demo today. But I don't believe I actually have too much time for that anyway. So that actually brings us to the end. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. If you are interested in working with us on this, please feel free to reach out to me or Typefox or anyone on the project. And yeah, now if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you very much.